where Downey Jr. pointed out to both Marvel and Disney that this could not only ruin his reputation, but also cost him fans, and he's against making those statements.
Yeah, and it's like the real Tony Stark, it's like back somehow, and there's like a moment where she's flying through and he's like, who is that? And she's like, I'm Ironheart, Mr. Stark. And he's like, I like that girl. And then,
however, both Bob and Kevin informed him that taking part in these types of statements and the press tour for Ironheart is built into his very expensive contract for the future of the MCU, mostly related to the return in Avengers Doomsday.
It deserves your attention. Ironheart deserves your attention.
RDJ is already challenging both Bob Iger and Kevin Feige that he will only make statements defending Ironheart and Riri Williams if it avoids arguments about DEI.
Natalie AI thing seems utterly preposterous and ridiculous, and even for an MCU show, I'm finding it to be a little bit of a bridge too far to go. The heist crew, all lame. Every single one of them, all lame.
And so in this, I'm not sure what they're meant to be, because this character isn't to be confused with Slog.
Slug, our hacker extraordinaire.
Who is also the exact opposite in the same show. I'm really confused.
They also had Robert Downey Jr., and they had him roll out and really kind of prop the show up and prop the character of Riri Williams up above Tony Stark, and really tried to really have him really as the face of the Ironheart press tour, and it really just backfired completely.
It deserves your attention. Ironheart deserves your attention. That's how I knew. I was like, oh, they are desperate to get people to watch this show. But after I did my reaction, I kept getting, hey, it wasn't that bad. I just watched it. Hey, I just watched the first 3 episodes. It wasn't that bad.
Ironheart might be one of the worst executed ideas ever in the MCU, because under all that garbage was actually potential.
yeah, and it's like the real Tony Stark, it's like back somehow, and there's like a moment where she's flying through and he's like, who is that? And she's like, I'm Ironheart, Mr. Stark. And he's like, I like that girl. And then he like goes to do something else. Like that would be like the level of something that I think would possibly happen.
Ironheart is back, this time going to an uncomfortable place for viewers.
Ironheart is the biggest L of Marvel of all time. The reactions are just spectacular. Supposedly smarter than Tony Stark, bites an electric wire, sells her soul to gain magic powers, uses new powers to steal. What did the writers mean by this? Smoke detector beeps.
I can understand why she's frustrated. That's how I feel watching her interviews.
How do you feel about the impact that she's having on young Black girls? And I'm going to be completely honest, on Black women.
You know, this is yet another area that's getting vibrant. It's getting full in the way that it should be.
Ironheart is practically unwatchable.
This show basically keyed their car, their mom, and in their bowl of cereal in the morning.
What happens when the face of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Robert Downey Jr., is pushed into a PR nightmare by the very company that made him a global icon?
Bob and Kevin refused, and they are forcing him to make statements to go against Marvel fans that are opposed to the Riri Williams character. Now, RDJ is also very annoyed with Marvel and Disney after they initially forced him to do PR and become a part of the press tour, since it was built into his contract for Doomsday. With the show,
this isn't just a story about a show's failure. This is a battle between one of Hollywood's most respected actors and the corporate giants behind Marvel Studios and Disney. A tale of broken promises, betrayal, and a Hollywood drama that may change the future of the MCU forever.
I recall when they forced Robert Downey Jr., they made a deal with him to take part in the press tour to prop up Riri Williams, played by Dominique Thorne, on multiple talk show programs out there, a lot of which were, of course, you know, affiliated with Disney. We'll talk more about that down the road. However, this is where it gets really intense, because we know that Robert Downey Jr. is a very busy man right now. He is heavily involved with Avengers Doomsday.
In the aftermath of Ironheart's disastrous performance, Marvel Studios and Disney found themselves scrambling. Viewership numbers were plummeting. Fans were flooding social media with criticism. And then, in a move that seemed both desperate and calculated, they brought in their biggest weapon, Robert Downey Jr. But instead of helping the situation, RDJ's involvement only exposed deeper fractures within the studio.
Kevin Feige and even Dominique Thorne heading into complete damage control to really take control of the situation, and so far that has worked to no avail. Well, this is exactly what's been going on now, to the point where Bob Iger and Kevin Feige are getting involved in a lot of drama with RDJ, Robert Downey Jr.
Let's dive into how Robert Downey Jr., the actor who once helped shape the entire Marvel Universe, found himself in the middle of a PR disaster, and why he's fighting back in ways that might just change the MCU forever. When Ironheart was first announced, fans were both curious and excited. After all, Marvel was introducing a new hero to take up the mantle of Iron Man, Riri Williams, portrayed by Dominique Thorne. A bold, new character in the MCU meant new storytelling potential. But as the series aired, it quickly became apparent that something wasn't landing with the audience. Ratings tanked. Fans took to social media, not with praise, but with frustration. Many couldn't understand why a character like Riri Williams, who was still in the early stages of her arc, was being pushed as the next Iron Man. The comparisons were forced, and the lack of a natural character development arc only fueled the backlash. But this wasn't just about the show, it was about the image of Marvel itself. And here's where it gets interesting. Marvel and Disney, desperate to save face, turned to their ultimate corporate weapon, Robert Downey Jr. For over a decade, RDJ had been the heart of the MCU. He was Iron Man. His performance defined a generation of moviegoers. The idea was simple. If RDJ endorsed Riri Williams, if the face of the MCU championed this new hero, surely fans would follow. But it backfired. Instead of generating the excitement Marvel had hoped for, RDJ's promotional appearances felt forced. His praise of Riri Williams seemed scripted, hollow, like he was reading from a corporate press release instead of speaking from the heart. Fans weren't fooled. The lines between genuine support and corporate manipulation had blurred, and the backlash grew even louder. People didn't want to hear RDJ defend a show they already felt was misfiring. They saw it as the classic Hollywood tactic: force the legacy star to sell an unpopular product. But this wasn't just about the show. It was about something deeper, something more personal to RDJ. The real issue was that Marvel had promised him this wouldn't happen. They said, get involved, help Riri, and the show will be a success. Yet here he was, doing everything they asked, only to watch the show fail, and his own reputation potentially getting dragged through the mud. Now, RDJ wasn't just promoting a character he had no creative control over. He was being positioned as the defender of a show, a series, and a character that many felt wasn't ready for the limelight. And that's when things took a turn. As RDJ's involvement in the press tour continued, tension started to rise. Behind the scenes, Marvel Studios and Disney had a plan that hinged on getting RDJ to publicly defend Ironheart, not just as a new show, but as a new direction for Marvel itself. This wasn't just about promoting Riri Williams. This was about positioning her as the next Iron Man in a universe that had already been defined by Tony Stark. Marvel's top brass, Bob Iger and Kevin Feige, believed that RDJ's endorsement would be the key to winning over skeptical fans, but they weren't prepared for how much resistance they would face. RDJ had always been fiercely protective of his relationship with the fans. He wasn't just an actor for hire. He had a bond with the audience that was built on trust, authenticity, and creative freedom. And that trust was about to be tested. According to reports, during a remote call with Iger and Feige, RDJ was pressured to release a public statement not just praising the show, but also defending it against the growing criticism. The problem? The criticisms weren't just about the show's quality. They were wrapped up in hot-button issues like diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, and accusations of being against women. Fans were being labeled as that as well, simply for not liking the show, which only made things worse. RDJ wasn't comfortable with the direction the conversation was going. He had always supported diversity in Hollywood, but he also understood that criticism of a show's creative direction wasn't always about identity. It was about storytelling. He made it clear he wasn't going to be used as a pawn in a corporate agenda to push a narrative that wasn't in line with his values. So what did he do? He refused. RDJ pushed back hard. He wasn't willing to let Marvel and Disney force him into the middle of a culture war that would inevitably alienate a significant portion of the fan base. He said he would only make statements supporting Riri Williams if the focus remained on her character development and story arc, without diving into the deeper issues of DEI or gender. But that wasn't enough for Disney. Feige and Iger doubled down. They reminded him that his involvement in these promotional efforts was contractually obligated, and not just for Ironheart, but for projects tied to his eventual return in Avengers Doomsday. RDJ's role in promoting Ironheart wasn't just a favor to Marvel, it was part of the very contract that ensured his future in the MCU. But this wasn't just about fulfilling his contract, it was about his image. RDJ knew the stakes. He was being forced to defend a show that, in his opinion, had lost its way. And the idea of being the face of a controversial product, even if it meant saving his future in the MCU, left him feeling betrayed by the very people he trusted. As the conflict intensified, it became clear. This wasn't just a PR campaign anymore. This was a battle for his career and reputation. The tension between Robert Downey Jr. and Marvel Studios escalated in ways that no one could have predicted. What started as a contract obligation quickly became a battle of ethics versus corporate manipulation. For RDJ, this wasn't just about defending Ironheart. It was about his reputation and the trust he had built with his fans over the years. He had always always been seen as someone who spoke from the heart, someone whose authenticity resonated deeply with the audience. To be asked to defend a show he believed was fundamentally flawed, and to do so under pressure, was a direct threat on the relationship he had with his fanbase. Here's the thing, RDJ has always been a fiercely independent figure. Even when he signed on for future MCU projects, there were always creative limits. His involvement in future Marvel projects was never supposed to turn him into a corporate mouthpiece. And yet, here he was, being forced to sell a show that was quickly unraveling in front of the world. When Marvel and Disney insisted he make public statements that not only defended Ironheart, but also addressed the fan backlash around issues of DEI, it was more than just a request, it was an ultimatum. This wasn't just about keeping the fans happy anymore. This was about controlling the narrative and forcing a particular message onto the audience. But RDJ was done being controlled. He made it clear to Marvel executives that this wasn't just about promoting a show, it was about maintaining his integrity and preserving the bond with his fans. He wasn't going to lie or defend something that felt fundamentally wrong. If Marvel wanted his help, it had to be on his terms, authentic and focused on the creative aspects of the project, not dragged into the trenches of divisive cultural debates. And let's be real, this wasn't just about Ironheart anymore. This was about how Marvel had used his image for a product that failed to live up to expectations. He had been misled. He had trusted them when they said, "Get involved, help prop up the show, and it will turn things around." But when the ratings plummeted and fans continued to lash out, RDJ realized just how far Marvel and Disney were willing to go to shift the blame and protect their own corporate interests. RDJ felt betrayed. And his frustration wasn't just about Ironheart. It was about being manipulated by the very people who had once trusted him with their creative vision. The corporate push from Feige and Iger wasn't just a PR effort. It felt like a personal violation of everything RDJ stood for in Hollywood. The public fallout from RDJ's refusal to comply with the PR campaign was swift and intense. As soon as the word got out that he wasn't willing to go along with the forced narrative, the implications were clear. Marvel was losing control of the messaging. While Downey Jr. was contractually obligated to promote certain projects, including Ironheart, his stance on not becoming the corporate spokesperson for controversial issues left the studio with few options. The press and fans alike took notice. What was once a tight-knit relationship between RDJ and Marvel was now strained. So, what did Marvel do? They pushed back hard. Behind closed doors, the studio began aggressively pushing RDJ to toe the line and promote the show, not just as a part of his contractual obligation, but as a moral duty. After all, the stakes were higher than just a show. It was about Marvel's brand. With Avengers Doomsday on the horizon, Marvel's entire future was on the line. They couldn't afford a damaged reputation just as they were about to launch their biggest movie since Avengers Endgame. But RDJ wasn't having it. He wasn't going to let Marvel paint him into a corner and use him as a scapegoat for their failures. He had too much at stake, not just his career but his own personal values. He wasn't willing to be the face of a narrative he didn't believe in, and the idea of going on another promotional tour for a failing show felt like a betrayal of the fans who had supported him from the very beginning. The deeper issue here was how Marvel had relied so heavily on legacy stars like RDJ to defend their newer, more controversial projects. It was as if they were asking these stars to put their reputations on the line for something that wasn't even working. This situation wasn't just about Ironheart anymore. It was about how Marvel was starting to lean too much on its past to prop up its future. In RDJ's mind, this was a fundamental misstep for Marvel. He had always been a part of the studio's creative vision, helping to build the MCU into the global phenomenon it had become. But now, he was being dragged into a corporate mess he had no hand in creating. And worse yet, he was being asked to fix something that felt broken at its core. The fallout wasn't just a matter of contract terms anymore. It was a personal battle between RDJ's need to preserve his reputation and Marvel's need to salvage its brand. And the more RDJ refused to comply, the more it became clear. This wasn't just a public relations disaster, it was a fracture in the very relationship that had made the MCU what it was. Marvel's use of RDJ to sway public opinion on Ironheart felt manipulative to him, and as the fallout continued, the rift between him and the studio only grew. For someone who had poured his heart and soul into bringing Tony Stark to life over a decade, being treated as a corporate pawn was a slap in the face. What's more, the fan backlash was growing louder. RDJ wasn't just defending Riri Williams or Ironheart, he was now being seen as someone who was committed in defending a show that many fans felt was disrespecting the legacy of Iron Man. His involvement wasn't winning over audiences, it was just making things worse. With Avengers Doomsday on the horizon, RDJ's involvement in the MCU was more critical than ever. But with this fracture in his relationship with Marvel, the question was no longer about his return. It was about whether Marvel could truly course correct before it lost its most beloved legacy star in the process. As we move further into this saga, the crux of the issue becomes more apparent. Marvel Studios' reliance on legacy stars like Robert Downey Jr. was always a double-edged sword. For over a decade, RDJ was the face of the MCU. His portrayal of Tony Stark was synonymous with the brand. Fans trusted him, and Marvel understood that his involvement was crucial essential to the ongoing success of the franchise. But when Ironheart failed to resonate with audiences, that trust was put to the test in a way that Marvel Studios may not have anticipated. The disastrous performance of Ironheart exposed a gaping hole in Marvel's strategy. They had bet on Riri Williams, a new, unproven character, and tried to elevate her to the level of Tony Stark. But it didn't work. Fans were resistant to the idea of replacing their beloved Iron Man with a character they didn't connect with. The forced comparison of Riri to Tony Stark only intensified the backlash, and RDJ's involvement in the press tour only added fuel to the fire. This wasn't just about bad marketing, it was about the erosion of trust between the MCU and its core fanbase. Fans didn't want to see Tony Stark replaced. They wanted to see new characters emerge alongside the heroes they already loved. But Marvel had insisted on making Riri Williams the next Iron Man, and in doing so, they ignored the most fundamental rule of the MCU's success: earned legacy. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, legacy isn't just handed down, it's built over time. Tony Stark didn't become Iron Man overnight. His character was forged through years of storytelling, character development, and most importantly, audience connection. To expect fans to simply accept a new Iron Man without earning that spot felt disingenuous. And here's where the real problem lies. Marvel was relying on their legacy stars like RDJ to defend their creative missteps, which ultimately undermined the entire foundation of the MCU. When you have a fan base as loyal and passionate as Marvel's, you can't just shove a new hero down their throats and expect them to accept it. The legacy of Tony Stark was too important, and Marvel had no idea how to navigate the transition without upsetting the very fans who had built the MCU. Marvel executives, particularly Kevin Feige and Bob Iger, thought that by bringing RDJ into the fold to prop up Riri Williams and Ironheart, they could salvage the project. But instead, they inadvertently highlighted the disconnect between the studio's vision and what fans actually wanted. RDJ wasn't just defending a show, he was defending a creative choice that went against what fans had invested in for over a decade. And in doing so, he was being caught in the crossfire. RDJ's involvement in Ironheart went from being a strategic move to a disaster. He was forced into a position where his authenticity was compromised, and no amount of scripted praise for Riri Williams could save a show that failed to connect. And this entire fiasco raised an even bigger question. How far can Marvel lean on its legacy stars before it starts undermining the very foundation of what made the MCU so successful in the first place? When your biggest star is resisting the very narrative you want to push, it becomes clear that something deeper is broken. Marvel had counted on RDJ to help usher in a new generation of heroes, but instead, they've stumbled into an era of crisis management. The very strategy that had served the MCU so well, using its legacy stars to bridge the gap between old and new, was now unraveling in front of their eyes. Now we have to talk about the bigger picture. What does all this mean for the future of the MCU? After all, we're not just dealing with one failed show here. We're dealing with a larger shift in Marvel's strategy that could have repercussions for years to come. The question that looms large over everything is, can the MCU survive without its legacy stars? Or more specifically, can it survive if it continues to alienate them? When Robert Downey Jr. entered the MCU in 2008, it was the beginning of something revolutionary. RDJ's portrayal of Tony Stark was the foundation of the MCU's entire structure. He was the center of the universe, the gravitational force around which the entire franchise orbited. The movies that followed built on this momentum, creating a cohesive, interconnected universe that fans couldn't get enough of. RDJ was the key, and the studio built its future around him. But now, with Ironheart and other recent disappointments, it seems that Marvel is trying to move away from its legacy characters and embrace a new era of storytelling. The problem, however, is that this new direction is being forced, and not just in terms of creative decisions, but also in terms of corporate strategy. Marvel's new leadership, including Bob Iger and Kevin Feige, are facing mounting pressure to expand the MCU and tap into new demographics. The problem? The new direction feels more corporate than creative. From the forced promotion of Ironheart to the mishandling of other projects, it feels as though Marvel is prioritizing diversity and corporate growth over the very thing that made them successful: great storytelling. By pushing a narrative of diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, to the point where it alienates their core audience, Marvel is taking a massive risk. Yes, it's important to push for a more inclusive industry. Yes, it's important to bring new voices to the forefront. But when those efforts feel forced or are perceived as disrespecting the legacy of established heroes, it's not just the new heroes that are hurt, it's the entire brand. And here's the kicker. They've already lost the very stars who made the MCU great. When legacy figures like RDJ, whose connection with fans is built on years of trust, begin to resist corporate control, it signals a loss of creative integrity within Marvel Studios. If RDJ can be treated as a mere pawn in a corporate game, what does that say about the studio's future? Will other actors follow suit? And if they do, where does that leave Marvel? To make matters worse, the damage control around Ironheart only exacerbated the issue. Rather than addressing the show's flaws head-on and being transparent with fans, Marvel and Disney tried to bury the issue with more press tours, more scripted statements, and more reliance on RDJ. But no amount of PR could change the underlying problem. The show just wasn't working. So what's the cost of all this corporate interference? For one, it's a loss of trust with fans. RDJ was always seen as a voice of authenticity within the MCU. And now that trust is fractured, fans don't want to see him forced into corporate-driven rhetoric. They want him to speak from the heart, just as he always has. But there's an even larger risk at play: Marvel's future strategy. If the studio continues to push out projects that feel more focused on diversity quotas than on actual storytelling, it risks losing the very thing that made the MCU so special: its ability to tell compelling, character-driven stories that resonate across demographics. Marvel cannot afford to lose sight of the storytelling magic that made its earlier successes so enduring. In the end, Marvel's future is at a crossroads. The decisions made in the wake of Ironheart's failure will shape the next phase of the MCU. Can Marvel return to its roots, focus on great stories, and rebuild its relationship with legacy stars? Or will it continue down this path of forced narratives and corporate control, pushing away the very elements that made the MCU great in the first place? That, my friends, is the million-dollar question, and the answer could change the MCU forever. As we enter the final chapters of this story, we have to ask, what happens next for the MCU? Can Marvel Studios maintain its identity while navigating the fallout from the Ironheart disaster? The company finds itself at a critical juncture, where its core values, creative freedom, audience connection, and legacy, are all on the line. And as the world's most successful movie franchise faces growing backlash, it's clear that Marvel's future strategy needs to evolve, or risk crumbling under the weight of its own missteps. For years, Marvel has thrived by evolving its storytelling while staying true to its roots. Legacy characters like Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor formed the backbone of its cinematic universe, and fans grew up with them. These were characters with depth, flaws, and compelling narratives. The success of the MCU hinged on the notion that the universe could grow while still respecting its foundation. But with the arrival of Ironheart, things took a turn. The show's failure wasn't just a failure of one project, it represented a crisis of creative vision within Marvel Studios. Marvel's attempt to force-feed diversity through its newest characters, without earning the emotional investment of the audience, put them at odds with fans. The backlash wasn't necessarily against the idea of new characters or diverse stories, but against the corporate-driven narrative that felt disconnected from the organic storytelling Marvel once prided itself on. What had worked for over a decade suddenly felt contrived and overbearing, and this began to pour into every aspect of Marvel's brand. The forced promotion of Riri Williams as the next Iron Man wasn't just a misstep, it was an identity crisis. It seemed to ignore the audience's genuine attachment to Iron Man, and instead insisted that the audience simply accept a new character, who, for many, hadn't yet earned the right to stand in the same league as Tony Stark. And this wasn't just a failure of the Ironheart series, it was a failure of how Marvel approached legacy, character development, and fandom. What was once a creator-driven universe, where fans saw the gradual growth of their favorite characters, was now turning into a corporate-driven machine, where characters were pushed into positions based on marketability or social narratives, rather than organic storytelling. The most glaring example of this was how Marvel handled the introduction of Riri Williams. Fans weren't opposed to a new hero, they were opposed to being told that this new character was a worthy replacement for Tony Stark, when the story itself hadn't justified that claim. It wasn't just about Ironheart, it was about how Marvel's vision seemed increasingly disconnected from the fans that had been with them from the very beginning. The reason Ironheart didn't work wasn't because of its lead actress, Dominique Thorne, or the idea of Riri Williams as a character. It was because Marvel didn't give her the proper foundation, creative development, or audience investment to justify the narrative shift. And in trying to make the audience accept that shift without the groundwork, they lost the very thing that had made the MCU such a success: genuine, heartfelt storytelling. Now, let's take a step back and look at the broader issue at play: the MCU's cultural dilemma. For years, Marvel Studios has been able to walk a fine line between entertainment, inclusivity, and respecting its roots. But in today's climate, that balance has been disrupted. The cultural conversation around representation, diversity, and identity has become far more complex. And for many fans, it's becoming increasingly hard to reconcile these conversations with the stories Marvel once told so well. At the heart of the issue lies a fundamental tension between what fans want and what they are being told to accept. The push for more diverse characters like Riri Williams, America Chavez, and Kamala Khan is part of a larger cultural shift within Hollywood, one that Marvel has embraced in many ways. But the danger lies in the way these characters are being introduced into the MCU. Rather than growing from organic, character-driven stories, these characters are being inserted into the MCU as part of a corporate agenda. And fans, particularly those who have been with the MCU since its inception, are noticing it. Marvel is trying to elevate new characters while also keeping the legacy of its older heroes alive, and yet the dissonance is becoming apparent. Fans who grew up with Tony Stark, Steve Rogers, and Natasha Romanoff are now being asked to buy into the idea that the next generation of heroes can simply replace them. But it's not about replacing these iconic characters, it's about carrying the legacy forward in a meaningful way. And if Marvel wants to stay true to its roots, it needs to stop treating its audience like passive consumers who will accept anything that is handed to them. This has been a key issue with the marketing of Ironheart. The show's creators, in trying to introduce Riri Williams as a key figure in the MCU, underestimated one crucial factor: fans need to connect with the character. Simply telling the audience that this new character is important, or even saying they're the next Iron Man, doesn't work unless the audience feels that connection. And when it becomes apparent that Marvel is pushing an agenda rather than crafting compelling stories, that's when the audience begins to push back. Marvel's dilemma now is how to balance the need for inclusivity and representation with the need to honor its legacy. Can the MCU stay relevant without sacrificing its core principles? It's a cultural tug-of-war that will define the studio's future. The question remains, will Marvel learn from its mistakes and pivot back to telling stories that are grounded in authentic character development and genuine connection to the audience? Or will they continue to chase trends and narratives that feel forced? Finally, we arrive at the question that will determine the fate of the MCU. Can Marvel Studios rebuild trust with its fanbase? As we've seen, the fallout from Ironheart is far from over. RDJ's involvement in the press tour only highlighted the growing disconnection between Marvel and its fans. What started as a simple promotional effort became an unprecedented PR disaster, forcing the studio to reckon with the public backlash. The question is, where does Marvel go from here? First and foremost, Marvel needs to acknowledge its mistakes. The corporate push behind Riri Williams and the forced marketing of Ironheart can't simply be ignored or brushed aside. Fans saw through the facade and they weren't happy about it. The key to rebuilding trust is transparency, admitting when things go wrong and committing to doing better. For years, Marvel was lauded for its transparency and respect for its audience. If they want to maintain that reputation, they need to take accountability for this misstep. Second, Marvel needs to reaffirm its commitment to storytelling. This isn't just about adding more diverse characters to the roster. It's about creating characters that are worth rooting for. If they want fans to invest in new heroes, they need to earn that investment through great writing, thoughtful character arcs, and compelling narratives. No amount of PR will save a character if the audience isn't given the chance to care about them. Lastly, Marvel needs to reconnect with its core fans. For over a decade, Marvel has been successful because it understood its audience. But as the company grows, it's clear that they're struggling to balance the desires of their core fans with the demands of an increasingly vocal cultural landscape. The key to maintaining that balance will be listening to their audience and remaining grounded in what made the MCU so special: great characters and great stories. In conclusion, the future of Marvel Studios is at a crossroads. The failures of Ironheart and the escalating tension with Robert Downey Jr. are just the beginning of a much larger cultural and creative battle. Can Marvel course correct in time to regain the trust of its fan base and reestablish its storytelling dominance? Or will the push for social correctness and corporate-driven narratives continue to alienate the very people who made the MCU the global phenomenon it is today? Only time will tell, but one thing is for certain: the era of blind loyalty between Marvel Studios and its legacy stars is over. The next chapter of the MCU could very well be its most defining. Let's just hope it's a chapter worth reading.